There are some things that are just impossible to miss in Miami, like the packed beaches that line its shores, the peaceful waters of its Biscayne Bay, and even the crowded windows of its Cuban cafes. But when you spend a day in the skies over this Florida metropolis, you also discover that it takes hard work to keep Miami running 24/7. There are those who battle bad weather and rough seas, others who put their lives at risk to protect America's shores, and even those who work through the night in a mad race against time. So much happens in a day in the life of Miami, it can be hard to fathom. And when the sun starts to set, this metropolis comes alive like no other place in America. With the colorful glow of Ocean Drive, explosions of light and sound, and even hard-fought games that get played high in the sky. All this in just one day on the lands and waters of Miami. It's almost 6 a.m., and the first morning light is just beginning to peek through the towers of downtown Miami. This city thrives like no other on sunlight. As dawn breaks over Miami Beach, teams of hotel staff race to stake out a place in the sun for their guests before many of them are even awake. Each hotel's uniquely colored beach chairs, cabanas, and towels all get freshly laid out on the sand. It's a daily ritual that's a big part of what gives Miami its signature style. Nearby, a group of yogis is already embracing South Florida's first light. But not everyone in Miami starts their day on the beach, especially not crane operator Timmy Gomes. Every morning to get to work, he has to climb up an 80-story crane that clings to the outside of one of Miami's highest skyscrapers. It's called Panorama Tower. By the time Timmy reaches the top of his crane and starts running through a daily check of the crane's pulleys and cables, he has the highest perch in Florida. The Panorama is the tallest structure on the eastern seaboard, outside of New York City. That means that every day, Timmy has the best view imaginable of the lands and waters that are known as Miami. But the name Miami refers to much more than just a single city. First, there's the river for which Miami was named. Native Americans called it Miami, or Big Waters. Surrounding the mouth of the river is the city of Miami itself, which lines Biscayne Bay. To the east is the separate city of Miami Beach, which covers at least 15 different islands. Then there's Miami-Dade County, which stretches out across more than 2,000 square miles between the Atlantic coast to the east and the Everglades to the west. There are 84 miles of shoreline in Miami-Dade County, including 22 miles of beaches. And that makes this part of Florida a big challenge for law enforcement. It's 10 a.m. and well-equipped agents aboard a Black Hawk helicopter are patrolling the shoreline. With its proximity to the Caribbean and the Bahamas, Miami has long been a favored destination for drug traffickers. Today, these shores are heavily guarded, but in the 1970s, federal law enforcement had very little presence here along South Florida's coast. That's when traffickers, working with the Medellin cartel in Colombia, discovered that it was easy to smuggle enormous quantities of cocaine into Miami, on the water and in the air, without getting caught. The men and women who ran those operations came to be known as the Cocaine Cowboys. Many believe that they paid off the police to keep their shipments coming. With so much drug money flowing through Miami, it soon became the banking capital of America. In those days, a steady stream of smugglers and dealers simply walked through the doors of Miami's banks with suitcases full of cash. At the time, banks weren't yet required to audit sources of cash deposits, which made it easy to launder drug money. Once the money had made its way into banks, law firms, and offshore corporations, it was often invested in property. In fact, many new buildings in downtown Miami in the 1970s and 80s were paid for with profits from cocaine. This empty lot on North Bay Road was once covered by the vast pink waterfront estate of Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar, head of the Medellin cartel. He bought the house in 1980 and is said to have used the dock out front to receive shipments of cash and cocaine. Federal authorities seized the property, and it was eventually bulldozed by new owners in 2016. By 1979, rival drug gangs had started turning Miami into the murder capital of America. On July 11th, a deadly shootout inside a liquor store here at the Dadeland Mall, south of downtown, kicked off the bloodbath. It came to be known as the Dadeland Massacre. In 1981, there were more than 600 killings in Miami. Federal law enforcement agencies moved in to shut down the operations of the Cocaine Cowboys and stop the violence. The last of the major smugglers, a man named Gustavo Falcone, managed to evade authorities for 26 years, but was finally captured in April 2017 in Orlando. Today, cartels still try and get drugs into Miami, but it's much harder now. Agents like these from U.S. Customs and Border Protection keep a careful eye on South Florida's coast 24/7. They do it with a wide array of assets, from helicopters to balloons to powerful fast boats. And every day out on the water, they train hard. These two men are actually federal agents taking part in an intercept training exercise. One of them is masked, since he often works undercover. Using a fast boat, just like the smugglers do, they'll try to reach land before they're stopped. For more than 5 years, the television series Miami Vice was filmed in and around Miami Beach. And now, with new films and television shows being shot here all the time, it can be hard to know what's real life out here on the water and what's not. The drug runners and human traffickers that U.S. Customs and Border Protection intercept come from islands across the Caribbean and the Bahamas. Out here, drug runners hope they won't be spotted as they make their way closer to the many inlets along the Miami shoreline, where they can transfer their drugs to dealers or simply drop them off in the water for pickup. But when U.S. Customs and Border Protection identifies potential suspects, it can take tight coordination by agents in the air and on the water to get them to stop. By using 2 Marine interceptor crews, agents practice keeping smugglers from making sharp turns as they try and get away. The goal is to keep pushing them closer and closer to land. Often, traffickers are heavily armed, which means agents like these have to be vigilant whenever they approach a suspect vessel. And when smugglers still try and outrun the agents, the Black Hawk above is equipped with a weapons system capable of taking out a boat's outboard engines with a single shot. The 2 agents acting as smugglers do exactly what most real suspects do when federal agents close in. They slow their motors and give up. Hands raised, they allow themselves to be cuffed and submit to arrest on their knees. There's almost always high drama happening somewhere in Miami 24/7. But there are also places along this stretch of South Florida coast that remain almost as quiet as they were centuries ago. And this is one of them, the mangrove-covered shoreline of Biscayne National Park. Long before European settlers arrived in South Florida, a Native American tribe called the Tequesta inhabited this coastal area. They survived by gathering plants and berries and fishing in the waters of Biscayne Bay. Today from the air, manatees can often be spotted here as moving shadows in these shallow waters. They have been called gentle giants and are the official state marine mammal of Florida. Manatees usually surface every 3 to 5 minutes, but they can stay underwater for up to 20. What makes this national park unique is that most of it is water, not land. The area of Biscayne Bay that lies closest to Miami and Miami Beach is filled with man-made islands like these that are known as the Venetians. Nearby lies Star Island, which may be Miami Beach's most famous, thanks to the celebrities who have lived here, including Gloria Estefan and Sean P. Diddy Combs. To keep the development of islands and waterfront land from getting out of control in and around Miami, the largest part of Biscayne Bay, which lies southeast of downtown, was placed under protection in 1968. Today, this national park covers more than 170,000 acres and includes ancient coral reefs and the northernmost islands of the Florida Keys. But right on the edge of this national park lies a surprising habitat, a nuclear plant that's also home to hundreds of the largest reptile species in the U.S. And they're not Florida's famous gators. In the 1930s, a Miami fisherman known as Crawfish Eddie decided to build a shack on stilts in Biscayne Bay so he could sell bait to his fellow fishermen. Others followed, and soon there were more than a dozen structures hovering over the bay. The community came to be known as Stiltsville. By the 1960s, there were bars and clubs out here too, and they lured many of Miami's most prestigious lawyers, bankers, and politicians. There was also a bar in a grounded ship named the Bikini Club, since it offered free drinks to women in bikinis before it was raided and shut down. The most famous Stiltsville structures, including Crawfish Eddie's original shack, were destroyed by hurricanes. But this one, owned by Jimmy Ellenberg, who was often called the mayor of Stiltsville, is still standing. By 1999, the state of Florida started forcing the last residents here to leave. People still come here to fish, but no one lives in Stiltsville anymore. The sounds of its nightlife are gone, and one day the last remaining shacks here may be too. But partying on the water is still big in Miami. And the most famous weekend watering hole today is a place called Haulover Sandbar. It lies in the Intracoastal Waterway between Miami's barrier islands and the mainland. Once, this was a quiet place to meet friends. Now, hundreds come to blast music, dance, and take selfies. Food boats also ply these waist-deep waters. The Miami-Dade Fire Department lets everyone know there's help nearby. But humans aren't the only ones in Miami-Dade who spend their days basking in the sun. One of America's top predators does too, and not in a place where many people would want to sunbathe. These canals and berms are part of the Turkey Point Nuclear Generating Station, just south of Miami. They were built to cool the heated water from the nuclear reactors instead of sending it into Biscayne Bay. In 1978, workers here at Turkey Point made an amazing discovery. They happened to spot a nest of baby American crocodiles on one of these berms. At the time, this species of croc was endangered. There have long been millions of alligators in Florida, which is why so many of them end up in people's backyards. But in the 1970s, there were just a few hundred American crocs left in the wild in the U.S. Up close, it's easy to tell these two predator reptiles apart. American crocs have a much longer snout than gators. Hoping these warm canals would provide a suitable breeding ground for the crocs, the plant started a program to monitor and protect them. Over time, the population grew. Now, there are more than 400 American crocodiles here at Turkey Point alone, and more than 2,000 total across South Florida. They are no longer on the endangered species list. These predators spend most of their days waiting patiently to strike potential prey. In South Florida, crocs and gators often share the same watery habitats, and when they battle, American crocs are almost always the victors. It's 12:55 p.m., just over a mile off South Beach. A storm is moving in, and ship pilot John Nitkin is pounding his way out to sea to do one of the most important jobs in Miami. He has more than 2 more miles to go, and the swells are only getting bigger. Out on the horizon, the crew on a massive container ship from Singapore, the Maersk Sanaa, is waiting for John's arrival. Every foreign cargo ship that arrives in the waters off Miami has to stop 5 miles out and wait for a Biscayne Bay pilot like John to guide it into port. For those on Miami Beach, this ship is just a tiny shadow on the horizon. But up close, it's colossal. The Maersk Sanaa is what's called a post-Panamax ship, one of a new generation of vessels that are bigger, faster, and are able to carry more containers than the largest ships that came before. Every day, on average, 3 cargo ships arrive at Port Miami, along with the many other vessels that have turned this port into one of the busiest in America. It's why the Biscayne Bay pilots are based right at the tip of the port, ready to go whenever a ship arrives or departs. Today, out on the water, the swells are hitting 12 feet, but on some days they get up to 20. John's tiny pilot boat is dwarfed by the containers that tower more than 100 feet above him. Miami's pilots have to clamber on board these giant vessels at all hours of the day and night, in every kind of weather imaginable. When the seas are rough, it's especially dangerous. If a pilot slips on the deck or ladder, or a swell suddenly yanks the pilot boat away from the ship's hull, he could easily get thrown into the water and crushed between the 2 vessels. But John is a 5th-generation mariner and knows well the dangers of life on the sea. After 28 years on the job, he's executed this leap thousands of times. He waits for just the right moment and then makes his move. On many ships, pilots have to climb 50 feet of ladder to reach the main deck. But this one has a portside hatch, and after just a few rungs, John's safely on board. When the world's biggest planes approach an airport, any trained pilot can land them, because runways for jumbo jets have all been standardized worldwide. That's not the case for the world's megaships. No 2 ports in the world are the same. And that's why ships like this one need to have a local pilot like John on board, since he has years of experience with the unique winds, currents, and varying depths of Miami's shipping channel. So just minutes after John arrives up on the bridge, the captain of the vessel hands off what sailors call the con. Out on the bridge wing, he sets up GPS equipment, so he knows exactly where the ship's bow, stern, and sides are in the shipping channel at all times. From now on, it will be up to John to decide every move the ship makes until it's safely at its dock at Port Miami. And Miami's shipping channel also has its own unique challenges. First of all, it's extremely narrow. Most other major ports in the world have channels that are at least 1,000 feet wide. But the width of Miami's is just 500 feet, and there's no room to widen it further. Guiding a fully loaded 140-foot wide vessel safely through this channel is a job for only the most experienced pilots and captains in the world. If you were to put this ship on its end, it would be taller than Miami's tallest building. A team of tugboats and their crews helps keep it on course. When the wind is blowing hard, like today, these megaships don't travel nicely in straight lines. The containers stacked on board act like a giant sail that constantly pushes the ship off course and causes it to crab. So when a vessel this size is on its way into Miami, there's very little room for error. If John doesn't keep it right in the center of the channel, it can run aground in a matter of seconds. If that happens, the channel could close down for weeks. No cruise ships would be able to come or go, and Port Miami, the largest driver of Florida's economy, would grind to a halt. Grounded ships often leak fuel, and a major leak here could turn the sands of Miami Beach into an environmental disaster zone. Today, it takes John 20 minutes to get the Maersk Sanaa lined up inside the narrow shipping lane. Unlike most major ports in America, Port Miami lies right next to the city. Those who live here on Fisher Island are used to seeing these enormous vessels gliding right past their windows, day and night. An hour after John boarded, it's time for one of the most dangerous parts of his job: landing this massive moving hunk of steel gently at the dock. He likes to think of his job as like that of an orchestral conductor. He calls every shot in a carefully choreographed dance of tugboats, crews, and engine thrusts. Docking procedures can be deadly. In other ports, container ships like this one have landed too fast, slammed into the cranes, and caused containers from the ship to crash onto the dock. But today, the Sanaa arrives without incident. Down below, longshoremen catch the lines that will keep this ship tethered to the port until dawn. With so many ships and boaters on the waters around Miami, it's not surprising that Miami-Dade County keeps a highly trained team of first responders right here at the port. But when these firefighters get a call, they don't slide down poles. They race outside onto a waiting fireboat instead. There may be bridges to most of the islands in Miami and Miami Beach, but it's often faster for paramedics like these to reach injured patients close to the shoreline by boat. In 2016, this fire rescue unit responded to close to 600 calls. As soon as a sick patient is bundled on the ground, the medics call in air support. Miami-Dade Fire Rescue is the primary medevac service for this part of South Florida. They cover everything from boating accidents to gator bites in the Everglades. The problem is, much of Miami, including its islands, is densely populated, and so fire rescue can't land just anywhere. Today, the fastest way to get this patient the treatment he needs is to meet the air unit on another island nearby known as Virginia Key, where there's space to land. Within seconds, the patient is airborne and on his way to a nearby hospital. The best way to understand the epic role that water plays in a day in the life of the city of Miami is to peer down on this sun-splashed metropolis from very high above. Up here, it's clear that just about every stretch of waterfront in and around Miami has been built and shaped by humans. But all that engineering is not enough to protect against the single biggest threat to this Florida city: the sea levels that have been creeping higher and higher every year. Most of the ground here is less than 5 feet above sea level, and some scientists predict that much of Miami could be underwater by the end of the 21st century. But the biggest reason Miami residents have a tough fight ahead is because of what lies under the city's streets. Miami, and most of Florida itself, sit on a bed of highly porous limestone known as karst. During hurricanes and powerful high tides, ocean water finds its way into the karst deep underground. Then, it starts bubbling up in Miami's streets. Walls around the city aren't enough to keep the water out. And if the sea continues to rise, Miami Beach could become a sandbar, covered entirely by water at every high tide. But for now, the desire to own a piece of Miami is stronger than ever. Just about every waterfront lot here is built on, even if it's just a few feet above sea level. And just like the sea itself, the prices for waterfront property continue to rise. In 2005, Jennifer Lopez sold this house on Biscayne Bay for close to $14 million. 10 years later, in 2015, singer Phil Collins bought it for more than double that price, $33 million. Even empty lots with water access ask unbelievable prices. These patches of dirt without a house were recently on the market for more than $15 million. But it's easy to spend 24 hours in Miami without having to think about all the long-term threats of rising sea levels, especially when you're out on the water itself or up in the air. It's 2:32 p.m. and a Miami-Dade Police Department helicopter is responding to a call that would be unusual in most major American cities. A submerged vehicle has been reported in a canal south of the city. These officers will try and spot the car from the air and help guide in an underwater recovery team that's just arrived on site. Their first priority is to find out if there are bodies inside. If you peer down on Miami from high above, you'll see that hundreds of miles of canals crisscross Miami-Dade County. They were built starting in the early 1900s to drain water away from the Everglades and to store and deliver it to local farmers. Some of these canals drain right into Biscayne Bay to help keep the land and neighborhoods around them as dry as possible. But these waterways are also, occasionally, used to commit insurance fraud. On the bank of this one, the underwater recovery team is finally ready to dive. Once they are in the water, police officers above provide extra eyes in the sky. These canals are the perfect breeding ground for gators. Recently, a police officer with the recovery team happened to spot a 12-foot gator tracking his colleagues in the water. The only choice they had was to shoot the gator dead. It takes just a few minutes to find the vehicle. It's a minivan. Luckily, the driver's not inside. Every year, dozens of vehicles like these end up in Miami's canals. They are often abandoned for insurance fraud or dumped to get rid of evidence. Some have even been found with corpses. With the divers and the car back on land, the officers in the air unit can head back to the city to wait for their next call. It's 2:45 p.m. and out on the quiet blue waters off Miami, another group of divers is getting ready to explore a unique site on the seafloor. About 40 feet down, beneath this boat, lies an underwater cemetery, more than 3 miles out at sea. It's called Neptune Memorial Reef. The memorials are made from the cremated remains of the dead, which are mixed with concrete and formed into shapes like shells and starfish. Today, a new memorial is ready to be laid to rest. After all the other divers are in the water, Jim Hutzler, who oversees the memorial, holds the 35-pound starfish to his chest and jumps in. It's just a short dive to reach the bottom. Even though it might look like one, Neptune Memorial Reef is not an archaeological relic from the past. It's a newly built underwater mausoleum for cremated remains. The crumbling ruins are based on an artist's imaginings of what the lost city of Atlantis might look like today. To get the permits for the project, the owners had to build the reef structures to withstand 100-mile-per-hour hurricanes. Now it's a popular site for recreational divers, as well as the family members of those who are memorialized here. Underwater, it takes Jim just 30 minutes to place the new memorial and attach it to the sea floor. Before he heads back to the surface, he'll mark the spot on a map of the reef, so the family of the deceased can come to visit anytime they want. Every day on average, more than 42,000 visitors from around the world descend on Miami. When the sun's out, these strangers pack in to share the sun and sand of Miami Beach. But there are big parts of Miami that most visitors never see. If you soar through the skies north of downtown, you might catch sight of these colorful buildings. They're named Liberty Square. In 2016, an Academy Award-winning film suddenly shined a spotlight on this housing estate and the neighborhood that surrounds it, which is known as Liberty City. The film, called Moonlight, is the coming-of-age story of an African-American boy named Chiron as he struggles with his own sexual identity and the drugs, crime, and poverty that have long plagued this Miami neighborhood. Moonlight's powerful human story resonated with audiences, and the film was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, winning 3, including Best Picture. But the real-life stories of the film's writer and director were a big part of what made Moonlight so powerful. Director Barry Jenkins and screenwriter Terrell McCraney grew up here in Liberty City in the 1980s. The two never actually met until they were adults. But like in the movie, Jenkins and McCraney struggled as kids with many of the same challenges as Chiron, and both were raised by single mothers who had HIV. When this vast housing estate was built in the 1930s, it was the thriving heart of Miami's African-American community. Up until the 1960s, African Americans weren't actually allowed to live in Miami Beach due to the city's segregation laws. Many of Liberty Square's earliest residents eventually moved out to buy homes in the surrounding neighborhoods. And by the 1960s, the buildings of Liberty Square had started falling into disrepair. Like much of Miami in the 1970s and 80s, the neighborhood was soon plagued by drugs and crime. To make Moonlight feel authentic, Jenkins cast residents from the neighborhood, and the colorful housing blocks of Liberty Square featured prominently in the film. Northwestern Senior High School does too. Jenkins, like the character Chiron, played football here. One of the film's most memorable scenes was shot inside this nearby diner. Moonlight was the first film made in Miami to win Best Picture at the Oscars. To honor its success, the city of Miami renamed a section of Northwest 22nd Avenue, which runs through Liberty City, Moonlight Way. There are many corners of Miami with rich stories that have not yet been told. But over on South Beach, one man has been telling the same story for the past 4 decades. And it's made him into something of a Miami legend. Every day since January 1st, 1975, Robert Raven Kraft has made an 8-mile run along Miami Beach, no matter what the weather. It all began as a simple New Year's resolution to run 8 miles every day for 1 year. More than 40 years later, he's still at it. And he says he hasn't missed a day or run since. He even ran during Hurricane Irma. Over the years, more than 2,500 others have joined him on what's known as Raven Run. Today is no different. Every afternoon, Raven and a pack of his fans and fellow joggers head south towards the end of Miami Beach. All along his route, locals come up to greet him as they celebrate Raven's more than 4-decade achievement and can-do spirit. Raven has made his daily runs during some of the most colorful periods in Miami's history. One of them was the 1990s. That's when South Beach experienced a major revival after its decline during the drugs and crime wave of the 70s and 80s. By 1992, one familiar face here along Ocean Drive was Italian fashion designer Gianni Versace. He purchased this Mediterranean-style villa just a few feet from the beach, and then expanded the house with lavish pools, gardens, and even his own observatory on the roof. He was frequently spotted on his morning walks to and from the nearby News Cafe, where he often went to read the paper over breakfast. But it was during his return home from the cafe one morning that Versace was shot dead on the steps of his house on July 15, 1997. His assassin, a serial killer, committed suicide a few days later on a Miami houseboat. Ever since, the steps of Casa Versace have been one of the most visited sites in Miami. It's 3 p.m. in Little Havana, just west of downtown. That's the time when small crowds start to gather at street-side windows like this one. They come for what's called a cafecito, or Cuban coffee. Miami's Little Havana is well known for these tiny cafes and their very strong espressos. As soon as Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba in 1959, Cuban exiles started arriving in Miami. To process these new arrivals, the U.S. government used this former newspaper building as a point of entry, and it soon came to be known as the Freedom Tower. But the largest number of Cubans arrived in Miami in 1980, during what's known as the Mariel Boat Lift. On April 20th, 1980, Fidel Castro suddenly announced he was opening up the port of Mariel near Havana for any Cuban who wanted to leave by boat. In the days and months that followed, 1,700 vessels of all shapes, sizes, and conditions made their way across the Florida Strait as part of a mass exodus of 125,000 Cubans. Some landed in Key West, but many went straight to Miami. Most of the new arrivals joined earlier Cuban immigrants west of downtown in a neighborhood known as Little Havana. Many got their first taste of American culture and language by watching Hollywood movies here, inside Miami's historic Tower Theater. Miamians of Cuban descent still gather every day at Domino Park to meet old friends over games of dominoes. Today, more than 30% of Miami's population considers themselves to be of Cuban origin. But Miami had ties to Cuba long before Castro's revolution. And one of those ties happens to have been a flock of pink flamingos. In the 1930s, a wealthy developer named Joseph Widener bought a former dog racing track, which now lies north of Little Havana. He transformed it into a racecourse for horses with a new luxurious clubhouse. It was known as the Miami Jockey Club. In the middle of the track, Widener installed elaborate gardens and imported 14 pink flamingos from Cuba to wander the grounds and awe the spectators. But after arriving here, the birds flapped their wings and flew away. Some say back to Cuba. Widener shipped over a second flock a few years later in 1934. But this time, he pinioned their wings so they couldn't fly. Hialeah Park has been known for its pink flamingos ever since. But the sight of these birds in Florida is not as exotic as it used to be. These days, there are new colorful sights in Miami, and they lie in an old industrial neighborhood downtown known as Wynwood. Artists started moving to empty warehouses here in the late 1980s after getting pushed out of other neighborhoods by rising rents. In the mid-2000s, a local developer named Tony Goldman began buying up buildings here with a vision of turning Wynwood into a giant arts district. To spur things along, he started Wynwood Walls, where artists could use the entire facades of buildings to create large-scale murals. Soon, just about any wall in Wynwood was a potential canvas for artists in Miami and from around the world. Today, there are hundreds of murals all across Wynwood. There are even works of art that aren't meant to be seen from the ground, like this one by artist Randy Berman. These words come from a poem written by an elementary school student in Miami's Liberty City neighborhood. Her name is Naima Marshall. Berman painted words from her poem here so passengers arriving at Miami International Airport could peer down and be inspired by Marshall's work. Every day in Miami, starting at 4 p.m. like clockwork, a long line of cruise ships loaded with new passengers head out to sea. Miami has been called the busiest cruise ship port in the world. From here, they head to the Bahamas and the Caribbean. Tomorrow morning, passengers on this ship, the Norwegian Sky, will wake up in Havana, Cuba. By 7 p.m., the waterways of Miami start to get quiet. But this is when longshoremen here at the port are just gearing up for another busy night ahead. One of them is Derek Dansby. He starts his shift with a ride up one of the port's towering gantry cranes. Soaring 262 feet above the water, these are some of the tallest cranes in the world, which is one reason Derek takes an elevator to get to the top. By 7:15 p.m., he's ready for his first pick, a pair of 20-foot containers from the Maersk Sanaa. It's one of more than 200 containers on this ship that are destined for Port Miami. To stay on schedule, Derek will have to pick up a new container roughly every 2 minutes and drop it onto a waiting trailer for the next stage of its journey. It's going to be a long night shift for Derek, as he and his fellow longshoremen race to unload and then reload this ship by dawn. When a day in Miami begins its transition to night, there's nothing like gliding across the now empty waters of this southern metropolis. As the last rays of the sun fade to the west, birds flock to Biscayne Bay. This is the time that the dazzling spectacle of night in Miami Beach starts to come alive. The most colorful lights line the city's legendary Ocean Drive. Built in the 1930s, The Colony Hotel has weathered the many booms and busts of Miami Beach, and that's why its neon blue letters are some of the most iconic here along South Beach. Nearby, a steady stream of clubgoers arrive at the Fontainebleau Hotel. They're here to try and get past the ropes at Live Nightclub, one of the highest grossing clubs in the world. Celebrities, including Jay-Z, have reportedly run up champagne tabs at Live in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. After dark, from above, it can seem like there's a party going on everywhere you look in Miami Beach. Even parking garages are lit up like clubs, including this one at 5th Street and Collins Avenue. But there's no explosion of color, sound, and light in Miami that compares to this, the main stage at the Ultra Music Festival. If there's one place in America that gives Las Vegas a run for its money at night, it's Miami. Every year, more than 150,000 people flock to this celebration of electronic dance music. They also come to experience the raw energy of one of the most powerful lighting and pyrotechnic displays on Earth. But Miami's colorful lights don't just come from once-a-year parties like this one. They also come from hard-fought games of soccer that are played by locals every night. These two rooftop soccer fields were the brainchild of Teofilo Cubillas, whose father, with the same name, was a star soccer player in Peru. They lie on top of a parking garage at 444 Brickell Avenue. In South America, soccer fields on the roofs of buildings are nothing new, since there's not enough open space left in cities like Lima and Rio to build fields on the ground. After opening these two pitches more than 13 years ago, they've been a big hit with office workers who come to play a game or two before heading home. And they are usually packed until 2 a.m. with players who work the second shift at restaurants and all kinds of other jobs across Miami. But not everyone in Miami has time to play soccer at night. Especially not Derek Dansby. He's now halfway through his 8-hour shift in a crane high above Port Miami. On the ground, manager Eddie Fluker keeps track of all 3 crane operators to make sure they stay on schedule and stay safe. Up above, Derek shuttles back and forth over the ship hundreds of times. Unloading and reloading an enormous vessel like the Maersk Sanaa is a mad race against time. And if crane operators lose concentration, even for a few seconds, they could make a fatal mistake, drop containers with millions of dollars of cargo, or injure and even crush their fellow longshoremen working on the ground. But when Derek does get a moment to pause, he has one of the most spectacular nighttime views of the city he calls home. And around him are workers and machines that keep Florida's economy running 24/7. By 7 a.m., the 300 new containers on the Maersk Sanaa have been loaded on board, and the giant gantry cranes have finally come to a standstill. It's time for this mega ship to head on to its next port of call. The problem is, it's facing the wrong direction and needs to be completely flipped around before it can leave. Miami pilot John Nitkin is already up on the bridge. One of the most captivating sights in Miami, from above, is watching giant vessels, including container ships and cruise liners, make their 180-degree turns so they can head out to sea, bow first. Turning these more than 1,000-foot-long vessels takes about 20 minutes, but years of experience and skill. Finally, this ship is lined up with the channel and ready to go. When you spend a day in the skies over Miami, you understand the unique work it takes, day and night, to keep this Florida metropolis running 24/7. But you also discover that Miami is much more than its sunlit beaches, much bigger than just a single city, and with many more stories than you could ever tell in just one day. But that's always been true on the colorful, fascinating, and always surprising lands and waters of Miami.